I just want to say I did get confirmation on that, and it is a yes, that
Okay,
they
okay,
would have to go through ULERP again.
okay. Thank you.
Great.
Good afternoon, Harlem and Harlems of the world. I am Terri Wisdom, and this is Harlem Network News on this great day, this great afternoon in Harlem. Much has happened. Harlem Network News is a new media platform. We started at the onset of COVID, and we're still here. It's been an incredible journey. It was very important for us to jump in the deep water to assure that the Harlem community is informed. Often, things that happen in our community are not transmitted on major media. Some of our community is really not listening to major media, but it's important that the community be informed. Knowledge is power, and this way can be engaged and help Harlem to be a better place. We have, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Clubhouse, soon to be Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and we are a pulse and drumbeat on the street of Harlem, for the people, by the people, of the people. Today, this afternoon, we have some very incredible, powerful guests who, if you don't know, you should know. We have our Deputy Manhattan Borough President, Keisha Sutton-James. We have our council member, Kristin Richardson Jordan. And these two public officials are new. They're about 4 months in. And we also have Delsina Glover, who is a candidate for our state assembly, as well as very, very knowledgeable and involved in housing. She was instrumental in the Lenox Terrace, winning and not having 5 other buildings built. So she knows her way around. So we're talking this afternoon about a project called the 145 Project. And I'm just going to let initially our council member, Kristin Richardson Jordan. Kristin, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, what district you represent, and what is this 145 project, and what was your or is your involvement with it in your position? Thank you, Kristin.
Sure. So, yeah, sure. So I'm Kristin Richardson Jordan. I'm the councilwoman for District 9, which is Central Harlem. And I ran on this platform of disrupting the district with Radical Love. And now we've been 4 months in office, implementing Radical Love in a bunch of ways, including a really robust constituent service strategy, regular outreach in the community. We have open task forces that anyone can come to, anyone can join, including a really well-attended and involved housing task force that meets every Monday on Zoom. And I'm just interested in continuing this this fight to grow our community, to support the community. There's definitely still a lot of need for change in Harlem. The 145 project, I think it went through multiple iterations. It certainly got progressively better, using some quotation marks around that. but because there were some affordable units added at the end to sweeten the pot. But I have to say, all in all, that it was the project is a massive upzoning, 915 units, half of which would be market rates, 60% of which would be well over what anyone I think could reasonably call affordable. Even at the end, I mean, touting 125% AMI as affordable is a joke. And it's saying six figures. Those making six figures that's a standard for affordability. And the immediate area where this project was going to be placed had census tract data at 30% AMI, of which there was initially no units matching that actual immediate area's median income of 30% AMI. And later there were 27 units. And then later there were about, I think in the end, we had just over 100 units. Out of 915 units. So it was just, we, in my opinion, never got there in terms of having something that would be truly affordable and accessible to the community. Plus we have the effects of displacement. When you put a influx of high AMI and market rate housing into a low income area, you can shift what is seen as the average income in that area. Now, white supremacy will act like that's negligible, like it doesn't matter. But those of us who have lived it, we understand that to be gentrification and violent displacement. When you drive up what is the average in an area by doing such a large infusion of market rate. So I've been against the proposal from the start. I was really adamant against organizing around it with the community. We did everything we could to push this developer to pull the proposal and come back to the negotiating table, because this was never really a project that we got to discuss as a community and really have robust conversations in the light of day about. This was something that just sprung up, and there were certainly certain members of the community that got to have those conversations, according to the developer, for several years. But for many of us, myself included, this was a very new, out of the blue project with not nearly as much community input as doing such a huge upzoning would necessitate.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. And we actually here at Harlem Network News, I believe it was a meeting that took place, that was initiated by the community board last Saturday, and it was an emergency meeting, and it was really empowering because there were about almost 250 people on a Memorial Day weekend, you know, at noon, that were on this meeting, which says the community cares, they want a voice. And there was a lot of discussion because it was our understanding, and I'm Terri Wisdom, this is Harlem Network News. It was our understanding that there was going to be a vote in the city council, you know, a small vote on Tuesday, a big vote on Thursday. And I know that your office and others were preparing to do some protesting here at 145th Street and Lenox Avenue, which is, you know, also Malcolm X Boulevard officially, and at the site. And the site is also where the National Action Network is with Reverend Al Sharpton. And we're hoping that Derek Perkison, Chief of Staff, is going to join us. But I'm going to go to you, Delsina. Just if you would just let us know who you are, and I want to know about your involvement and how you fit into the housing, you know, and all of this EULA and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
In the community. And maybe you can shed some light because, you know, for the most part, a lot of the community, even those of us that aren't informed, don't really understand AMI, don't understand EULA, how all these things are happening. It's my understanding that this project's been talked about for 7 years, but for some people, including a program, if you go to our YouTube, we did have Moray Davis, who is president of the board for Esplanade Gardens, which is a large, housing community that's right there. And they didn't really know this was happening for about a year or two ago. And they have a committee that they had formed, which is the 145 committee. They were concerned about the gentrification and the numbers, but they were also concerned about quality of life. What happens when you throw that many people into a community where the subway doesn't really sustain the community even now? So Delsina, if you would just introduce yourself. And I know you're also a candidate for a state assembly, but we want to kind of focus on the housing.
Oh, absolutely. I totally understand why I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Great.
That was a very compound question.
Yes, it's a
I'll try to answer.
Complex situation.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it in pieces. I agree with everything that the council members said. One of the things that was disturbing to me from the onset of this project is, well, not the onset of the project, but from learning about the project was number one, I didn't even know that there was a 145 project. Maybe I wasn't keeping up with what was going on. I didn't know anything about it, about this project until I got a call from, I think from the land use committee chair at the community board. And it was on the day or the morning of the environmental impact study. Now, the good thing about us at Lenox Terrace, when we were going through our fight, we knew that this project was coming for 10 years. And so for almost 10 years, and we had a lot of time, because I look back in my notes, I look back in my files, and I did strategic plans that we kept updating. And the first strategic plan that I wrote for our committee in opposition to the Lenox Terrace rezoning was in 2012. That's how long we knew that they tinkered with this thing for many, many years before they let it go, before they, brought it an actual plan. And had many conversations with the tenants in the executive committee, and nobody was in support of it. But we did have a lot of time to organize and reach out to the community and inform people. When I found out that there was an environmental impact, a scoping hearing, which a scoping hearing is the hearing that you have with the City Planning Commission, and you invite members of the committee, members of the community, and the community members give input into what their concerns are for that particular piece of the ULURP process. And so I did view the environmental impact, the scoping hearing, and I think there was maybe less than 25 people in the room from the community, wow. All from a certain area and organization. And I saw it after the fact, and I was extremely concerned about the fact that people in the community didn't know about this. And listening to the landlord and their claims that they had been meeting with people for years was just stunning to me, because it seemed to me that this thing was happening in secret. And I don't know how that could possibly happen. And so I was very concerned that the community had to play catch up with this, and that we in the community who were concerned had to play catch up with getting the word out to members of the community that this massive project was happening. Another part of your question, I think, was the size and scope of this project.
Yes.
So just to talk about city planning and land use. So one of the best things about our community, our neighborhood here in Harlem, and this is what it should be, is that we are zoned for residential. It's a residential rezoning. And it's always a flag when a developer wants to change the zoning from residential to commercial. The only way you can build like that, and they can build as of right, and I hope we can talk about that too.
Okay.
Build buildings that massive, you have to change the zoning from residential to commercial. Now, the whole idea of building cities, we have commercial districts, we have manufacturing districts, and we have residential districts. And residential districts are, the theory behind residential districts is what kind of a space that that people should live in, reside in, that is healthy for human beings. I mean, that was the historical theory behind residential rezoning versus commercial versus manufacturing. And so when you start this encroachment of changing the land use from residential to commercial, what that means is that you are tinkering with the environment in which human beings live, as far as I'm concerned, because then you can build massive buildings in very tight spaces, like they wanted to do at Lenox Terrace, which means you cut off light. One of the best things about Harlem, about our community, well, not necessarily one of the best things, but one of the good things, healthy things about our community is the light. It's the light, the sunshine, and for tall buildings like Lenox Terrace, which is only 16 stories, or Esplanade, these are buildings, this is a design that it was called Towers in the Park. And towers in the park mean you can build high, right? 16 stories or 12 stories, whatever it is, but the buildings are spaced apart. When you change the rezoning, then you can do something different. You can have towering buildings tight and close in a small geographical area like the 3 square blocks of Lenox Terrace. And so that should be a concern to everybody. Kristin, Councilmember Richardson Jordan already talked about the displacement factors, and the way that I describe it in Harlem is a wealth takeover. It's gentrification, but it's also a wealth takeover. And one of the things that concerned me about the escalating rents and about a project like this is there are people who are living in spaces right now in our communities. They may have terrible landlords. They may live in NYCHA and want to move. But what has happened is that with escalating rents, it limits your ability, your mobility within your community. You want to move out of a building that you don't like and move into another apartment in another building in your neighborhood, you can no longer do that. There's no within mobility within the community. That's another thing that disturbs me. And of course, the number of our historical families and African American people of color who are running out of the city in droves because they can't afford it anymore. I talk to people all the time, of course, now. And one of the things that they talk about always is the lack of affordable housing and the inability to find something in the neighborhood that they can afford. And that's not just with housing, that's also with commercial rents, because I'm also talking to small business owners. Yes. And I'm hearing horror stories from them about the building owners and their landlords' abuse with the increases in rent. I talked to one person just yesterday. His rent was, I think, $1,500. And then the building was bought and it went up to $4,000. And then there was a fire that was set and it burned down. They built it back up. And now his rent for this same grocery store is $8,000 in a matter of a few years. This is unconscionable. And this is how we lose Black Harlem.
We have a lot to contend with. And just briefly, I'm going to come to you, Deputy Borough President, so you can let us know how everyone ties together. But Delsina, can you give us a little bit, I think we just lost Delsina's picture, but I wanted you to share, Delsina, do you have an official capacity in the housing land use? How did you get your knowledge, or what has been your path, please? You're muted, Delsina.
Well, I started learning about housing and land use because I had to during the Lenox Terrace fight, but I've also been a housing activist, concerned about preserving affordable housing for a very long time, more than 15 years, more than 10 years, probably closer to 15. My most recent position was Deputy Public Advocate for Housing Equity in the Office of the New York City Public Advocate. And my portfolio includes zoning and land use, as well as, rental housing, NYCHA, and that kind of thing. Before that, I was executive director of an organization called Tenants and Neighbors, and we organized tenant associations and was one of the founders of a big coalition called Housing Justice for All, which saved rent and regulated housing with the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. And that took a long time to get done. It took years, but we finally got it done. So I started learning out of necessity and concern for what was happening in my neighborhood. And then I turned it into a profession,
Okay.
capacity.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just wanted to, this is Harlem Network News, and we are talking about the aftermath of the 145 project. And we've got some very powerful, knowledgeable women of Harlem on this Zoom this afternoon. So we're just becoming informed. We're hoping that Derek Perkison of NAM will be able to join us as they, you know, have a part or played a part in this, and their offices are actually where the 145 project is. So Deputy Borough President Keisha Sutton-James, if you would just introduce yourself to everyone and let us know who you are, whose you are, and if you can talk about the connection in terms of a project like this, because we know that I believe it initially, as a former member of the community board, that the project went to the community board, and the community board had to vote on it and give it a recommendation, which was a no. And then I believe that it went to the borough president's office, you know, for a recommendation, which I think was also a no. And then the next step was to go to city council for a vote. So if you could just tell us how all those things go together. And it was also my understanding that even if the city council had voted it down, that the mayor could possibly veto it. So I just want to know how it all turns together and where and what we as a community can and should be doing now. And also, like, since they withdrew the plan and it didn't get voted on, are they coming back, or what could potentially happen? Thank you, Keisha. Oh, she's frozen. Keisha? Okay, she may be a little bit frozen right now. We're dealing with a little bit of tech.
Can I add something while you were waiting for her?
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention.
Thank you.
I talked to Kristin about this. I was a part of the team at the Office of the Borough Advocate. I mean, at the Office of the Public Advocate that put together the legislation that became the Racial Impact Study legislation. And that kicked in on June 1st. And so now, whenever a ULURP application comes through of a certain type, and this would be one of those, and this 145 would be one of those types, would require a racial impact study. The only thing about but you know, just to point out that the racial impact study kicks in after ULURP begins. ULURP begins after the submission of the environmental impact study. The best thing that could have happened was that the racial impact study be required as part of the environmental impact study. But it would have, well, someone said it would have required a charter change. But in any event, it kicks in after ULURP start. But what it does give us is the ability to organize and educate folks on the racial impact, and it also requires the developer to produce a racial impact study, which means how is this particular project going to affect the racial makeup of a particular community. And so that's another good thing that happened when this project was pulled.
So we're going to go to Keisha. She's back, but if you could just, Delsina, quickly, what is ULURP? Because people hear this, but I don't think they really know what anybody's talking about.
Well, it's ULURP, which stands for the Uniform Land Use Review Process. And the Uniform Land Use Review Process is a process that we have a New York City Planning Commission that makes decisions on land use, and this is a charter commission, and they are required to be the overseers, the body that decides whether or not a land use change is beneficial to the city. And so there are various stages of the project, of the process. It starts with an environmental impact study. And then after the environmental impact study is completed, the City Planning Commission reviews it, and ULURP starts. ULURP is the review process is that the process or the particular land use change has to be reviewed by certain parties in the that have a elected or an official capacity. It starts with the community board. The community board is an advisory, is an advisory board, but it doesn't make a decision about whether something moves forward or not. So the community board, they review it. They can vote on it in these ways. They can say yes. They can say yes with with conditions. They can say no. They can say no with conditions. So, and then after they make their decision and they vote on it as a board, it moves. And I think it's in the during and it's also timed. So the community board review process, I think is 60 days, but somebody can maybe correct me on that.
Okay.
After the community board finishes, makes their decision, after those 60 days, then it moves to the office of the borough president for review. I believe the borough president, Keisha, also has 60 days. Or maybe the community board process is 90 days. I'm not quite sure. It moves to the borough president. The borough president does his review, his or her review, make a decision, says yes or no or maybe, and then it moves to the next phase.
Okay.
And the next phase is the New York City Council. Now understand, the New York City Council, then it goes back to the City Planning Commission, and then I think the mayor has a final say. However, please, everyone should understand that the New York City Council is the governing body for the ULURP. If the City Council says no, the mayor can come back and veto it, and then the council can override that veto. And it rarely happens that the mayor vetoes it, but sometimes it does.
Okay.
Very
well, thank you. That's a lot of information, but it's clear. Thank you for breaking it down, Delsina. And we're going to pass the baton to our deputy borough president, and you can pick up with the relationships and the stance of the borough president's office. Thank you, Keisha.
Sure. So I apologize. My Wi-Fi has been, I don't know, I'm having difficulty. So I joined back in on my phone. I hope that I won't have any problems just doing cellular. So I know that before I dropped, you had asked for me to, we can talk about, you said the stance of the borough president's office on this. Okay. So essentially where we are, as our host said, I'm the deputy. Mark Levine is the borough president, and essentially where our office is affordable housing is a very high priority for our office. It's a crisis in New York City, it is a crisis in Manhattan, and it's even more of a crisis in Harlem. So the goal for our office is to have a meaningful input and try to help us to get to a point where our city to a point, and in particular our borough, to get to a point where we can add affordable housing units to the island of Manhattan as a whole. That's always our focus and approach and priority. In this particular case, it was very, I'll say complicated. I'd say the dynamics between the developer and members of the community were complicated, at least I'll say. And Delsina touched upon some of those. And it failed ultimately. What we were looking for was more than 50% units affordable. And we could talk, I'm sure, at length about what is defined as affordable. We were looking for more than 50% units affordable. We were looking for the MTA. We're looking for a greater, a significantly greater mix for the shift of units the mix of units to go, from weighted towards studio and 1 bedrooms to 2 and 3 bedrooms, because the makeup of Harlem residents is more weighted in the, we're families. I grew up here. My grandmother grew up here. We raise families in Harlem. That is what we have done and will continue to do, at least if we are able to protect that. So we're looking for that weight to be shifted more to the 2 and 3 bedroom, away from studios and 1 bedrooms. We were looking for the developer to continue working with the MTA so that hopefully the MTA would change its stance on not effectively making any changes to the 145th Street station, because we recognize that, adding 1,000 to 2,000 more people to that corner was going to add significantly more congestion. And there are also questions around, not even questions, but the station isn't fully accessible in terms of ADA accessibility. So we were looking for those and other changes. We were pleased that, not entirely across the board, but pleased that we were able to get to over 50% affordability. I will also say that one of the things that our office had worked towards and we were pleased with was that there was a commitment from the developer that 50% of the units would be given preferentially to local residents, because we wanted to ensure that people from the community would be able to benefit from it. But ultimately, due to, I think, a number of reasons, it failed. It wasn't clear what the mix would be in terms of the types of units. I was surprised that didn't come up in the conversation. I didn't hear it in the conversation in the final community meeting. I don't know if anyone else had any information. We didn't see any information about what the breakdown was going to be in terms of the mix of size of units. Oh, I will say though, that one of the things that they threw in the end that we really, really did like was the 91 units of senior supportive housing, because we are also a community that is heavily weighted in terms of having a lot of seniors, and our seniors tend to be some of the most vulnerable community members for a number of reasons. We live on fixed incomes. I'm not a senior, but seniors live on a fixed income, tend to live on a fixed income. I've done a lot of elder care, and so I feel connected, I guess, to seniors in a way that I'm now assuming their identity. But having fully supportive housing for seniors is a whole other level. So we were, really happy that part had entered the conversation, and we were frankly disappointed that was not, that we won't have that. And this is where I think we are, our office is really struggling, and it is that, I agree entirely 1,000%, and I think we all agree at 1,000% with that which the Delsina and the council member have said around the dire need for affordable housing. And we really do see this as a crisis citywide. But the issue, in the context of the fact that there's very little city-owned land left in New York City, and in particular in Harlem, we are now dependent upon getting private developers to develop in a way that is that does contribute affordable housing to our housing market. So we that we are now, as electeds, as community members, in a really funky dance, if you will, where we're trying to extract the greatest benefit for the community as a whole, and not losing the opportunity to get what we need. And so you asked earlier about what's next. I don't think know what's next. I really hope that they come back to the table and that they don't do what they did across the street, which is to develop storage units and market rate housing as of right at the height that they are permitted to under the current law, under the current regulations. So it's this, as I said, it's this dance where we are now in a position where we don't know what the outcome will be. I hope that they will come back to the table, and I hope that we can carry the conversation further, so that we can get what is beneficial to the community, because the alternative is, like we said, what they've done across the street, storage units, no affordable housing, not union. Oh, that was the other thing, is that they were going to be using a unionized workforce to build it. They'd have no responsibility and no obligation to use a unionized workforce to build it. So, this is this balance that we as electeds and community members need to find in order to get the maximum benefit to the community without losing our hand completely, if you will. And so this is, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. It's not that we have a hand, but it is a strong hand. It is just not necessarily the upper hand, if you will, right? And so we need to do what we can. Sorry for the background noise, if there is any. Sorry, to do what we can in order to, as I said, extract the maximum benefit for our community. And I hope that they come back to the table and we're able to maximize it even further than where we were when they pulled their application just before the city council hearings.
Okay, well, thank you, Deputy Borough President Keisha Sutton-James. This is Harlem Network News, and I'm Terri Wisdom. And this is a very deep dive and complex conversation. And it's about the 145 project, which is on 145th and Malcolm X Boulevard. But it's really about what's happening in our greater Harlem community, and then our greater New York City. But because Harlem has been traditionally an African-American community, a community of, and I don't want to say immigrants because it's not the right word, but we have a lot of, mix of many different ethnicities, mainly people of color here in Harlem. So, when we hear "so goes Harlem, so goes the world," that's really real. So 145th has been a benchmark for what's going to happen and how do we deal with it. And the factor that maybe there has to be some moratorium, some legislation to just stop it, because we have economic disparity here. We have, violence, crime, homelessness, and all of this really has a lot to do with the housing and the gravelicious developers that are taking advantage. I know you had an interjection, Delsina. You wanted to add something about the ULURP.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a clarification because I made a little bit of a mistake when I was talking about the ULURP process. First of all, it's the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure and not process. And I also wanted to mention that it goes from the City Planning Commission to the Community Board to the Borough President, the Borough Board. Then it goes back to the City Planning Commission for approval. After that, it goes to the City Council, then the mayor, and back to the city council. The mayor vetoes whatever their decision is. So I wanted to clarify that. I also wanted to make one really, really brief statement about if they come back to the table and what they can do as of right at 145. What they can do as of right is they can build residential. It will be market rate, but I think they could, with the space that they have, they could build, I think it was, what is it, Kristin, 45 units or 54 units, something like that. And so
it's less than 50 units.
Yeah, less than 50 units. And for me personally, I would prefer less than 50 units of market rate housing with none affordable than I would with 600 units of market rate housing, because that's going to be a massive change in the community rather than versus what they can do as of right. This was the same thing that the developers talked about at Lenox Terrace, and they did not tell the truth. They told people, they tried to make the community think that they could do this project anyway as of right. And some people still think that it's not possible. I mean, we talk to all sorts of land use specialists, and we have someone on our team who is familiar with land use, and they could never have built 5 buildings at that height. They might have built one tall building or a series of low-rise buildings, but they couldn't do that. But they lied to the community and they lied to the tenants to try to get them to approve and go along with this project. But you know what? It didn't work. And so just pay attention to what the scenarios are before making a decision about whether or not, it's worth it to support a ULURP that's going to bring that much market rate housing to our community with no balance. And I don't think there will ever be a balance with this project.
Yeah, I want to, if I could just jump in, because there is a couple factors that I do think we're kind of glossing over, but we should be paying attention to. The first is affordability is a very high, very high concern for me and my office as well. And it's in that space that we actually made a rubric for the district looking at census data for longtime Harlemites, because we have to stop lying about affordability. I mean, like plain and simple, we are lying about it. A lot of the recent developments have been lies about it. And then we're celebrating things that are displacing people because we're lying about it. And to be honest, it is a lie to say that this last proposal was 50% affordable. It is not. That's just not correct. You can't count people making 6 figures as that, say it's income restricted, right? Okay, there's some income restrictions, but in a community where you have the median income in that immediate area being $36,000 a year, there is only just over 100 affordable units to the people who live in that immediate area. Now, I'm not talking about people from the rest of the district or the rest of the city, but listen, this thing with Harlem sacrificing for the rest of the city has got to stop. That's what happened with Hudson Yards. At what point are we going to have space that is really for our community? And are we going to take this area, which is one of the poorest parts of the district, and do such a massive upzone? These kind of massive upzonings only happen in our neighborhoods. It's only in our Black and brown neighborhoods. And they're predatory. And we should be honest about that. They are predatory. The tension that I think is being brought up is, okay, well, how do we get affordable housing that is actually affordable to the community if we have to deal with and confront private development? And I think the way we get there is by setting a standard, and make people match it, make the developers meet the standard. And that is it's going to be an ongoing process, but they have managed it in East New York. And I do keep pointing to East New York because this is like, we don't have to make it up. Like, this is literally an area of the city that went up in Black population over the last 10 years in census data, where all of our other neighborhoods went down. We don't have to make up the formula for how to keep a Black and brown neighborhood Black and brown. We actually know how to do it. It just means that we do have to raise standards. We do have to have a really concrete look at affordability. We can't go by measurements for the whole city or by measurements for majority white people. We have to go hyper local focus, census tract data for that specific area, hyper local, and look at what is really affordable in that immediate area, and then set a standard and stick to it. And I think it is hard with developers who are not who maybe aren't ready to meet us halfway. And I think we just need to be a bit honest about that too, because one of the details we're not talking about is that the 11th hour proposal was heavily subsidized by administration. So that was not the developer. So this is something we need to think about.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but can you clarify when you say that the proposal was heavily subsidized? What does that mean? Because people really don't understand what's going on. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. So, and I'll back it up a little bit. So sometimes in a ULURP, we get affordable units because the developer is giving us units, right? So if you take like a few weeks back in Crystal Hudson's district, there was a project that went through ULURP that she approved it. It wound up being 35% affordable. That was the developer. That was not government subsidy to make those units. That was, the developers sometimes, being that they have deep pockets, they cover the cost of doing
Okay.
those units.
Okay.
What I'm saying is some of what we ran into here and financials is something I continuously asked for and was never able to see in this development project. It has not been the case for everyone. There are others where I've been able to see financials, but as from my understanding, there were some very heavy government subsidies going into these affordable units, which is, I think we should just be honest, different from a developer who has skin in the game and who,
Right. And, and
covering some of the costs with
right.
their
Okay. So the subsidies
because
from
that's our
what my
government funds, and they are
layman's,
limited. Yeah.
okay, this is Harlem Network News, and I'm Terri Wisdom, and we're in a deep conversation about the 145th Street project, which is at 145th and Malcolm X Boulevard, which is going to build two big towers. And originally, there was even some talk about a civil rights museum that was coming out of National Action Network and Reverend Al Sharpton, and also allowing them to keep their offices there. I believe that they pulled that request for the Civil Rights Museum, and that's where more housing for the seniors was coming in. But one of the issues that was on the table was, even with the two towers, one of the towers was going to be like for the people with affordable paying less rent, and the other was going to be for the regular people, which that was a concern, because it could create a situation where those that, were having the more affordable rents were being treated differently, getting different services. And we've seen that happen up on 133rd Street in the past. So the question is, if they're getting subsidy, means government subsidy, that means taxpayers are paying for it. So the question is, why and how do we get control of this? Because sitting in community boards, I've heard developers just come in and boldface say, hey, we're not doing any affordable, we can't do it, we'll give you, the community, some tree beds. So how does this brazen attitude to a Harlem come in? Because I guess it seems like we're easy prey and we could be rolled over. So how can we stop this, especially since government subsidy is going into it? And last time I looked, we're all taxpayers, whether we're, being disparate, whether there are disparities or not, we still pay taxes. So can you just give a further explanation of that, Kristin? Councilman?
So I mean, in terms of how we stop it, I'm gonna go back to the standards. I also just want to say, the way to affordable housing, it's not saying yes to all development, and it's not saying no to all development either. So we should really be attuned to that fact that it's not about green lighting all development to go up everywhere. And it's also not about shutting down every development project.
Okay.
That's not how we get to more affordability. And I want to say that there are developers out there who are willing to work with community. I think it's I think it's not always easy to find them, and I think sometimes we get lost in this narrative of like evil developer versus community. But I do honestly and genuinely believe that there are folks out there with the means and capital and also interest to do things that are good for community. And I also think it is possible to have something that is good for the community and also profitable and also affordable to the local residents. And so it coming from that place, I don't think this was that, like this project was not that, but I believe that is possible. And so that's the direction I would like to see us go in. And we do have a lot of space in terms of air rights in Harlem. So I think there's room for us to think creatively about that.
Okay.
Can I hop in? I had a couple, man, just a couple things. One, I agree entirely, again, with so much of what you said. I just wanted to point out though, that like, yes, there are I agree, there are, they may be hard to find, but we have to deal with the developer that actually owns the property that we're talking about. Like we can't think about who might be out there unless we are able to execute a transaction where we're able to convince said developers to sell to said, other developer. So, we perhaps there are other ways that we can identify other property that we would maybe entice a developer to purchase or what have you. But when we're going through these processes, we're dealing with who we're dealing with. So I just wanted to point that out. The other thing I wanted to point out is, and I had a question for you, council member, is around the rubric and the hyper local. I wanted to understand better how hyper local, like how far out from the actual project are you defining as hyper local? Just because I know that corner has very few, other than all of the units in Esplanade, has very few residential units, obviously across, the 145th Street corridor. You've got the park down there, going down Lenox Avenue. There's commercial units, very few residential. So I just want to understand what your hyper local kind of definition is, to understand how you got to how you've gotten to the number that you're looking for in terms of what is actually affordable. But I did want to point out one thing around affordability, what you said about the 6 figures, is that 6 figures absolutely is a lot of money, but that also is a 2-parent unionized household. If you have, a person who's working for the MTA and a person who's working as a teacher, or in perhaps, there are a number of areas where you have a number of careers where a unionized household can be earning $50,000. A unionized employee could be earning $50,000, and if you have a 2-parent household each of whom is earning $50,000, that can be an affordable level for that family. I'm not saying that it should be weighted in that direction. I just wanted to say that is something that I know I hear, and I'm sure you guys have heard as well, from people who are saying, well, where do we fit in? We get excluded from affordable housing. We can't afford the $1 million homes. We can't afford even the $500,000 apartments. I can't afford a $500,000 apartment. And you're saying, how do I fit into this equation? And I want to just make sure that we're also we're taking into account, our office wants to make sure that we're taking into account obviously the real need for very deep affordability, but also for those people who are in the middle and nowhere near, I shouldn't even say it's in the middle, right? It's nowhere near the market rate units, but cannot qualify for the very deep affordability. And so I just wanted to make that kind of clarification around the 125 AMI.
Yeah.
But so if you could talk to your
So I'm definitely still gonna push back and say that the 125% AMI is really high. And if we look at census data, that's not the group that's been pushed out, quite frankly. The census data shows that income brackets ranging from 20 to 30,000, 30 to 40,000, 40 and 40 to 50,000 were displaced in the last census. And in fact, the largest bracket is that low income bracket of those making 20 to 30,000 a year or less, who were displaced. That's the bracket that went down over 10 percentage points in the last census, if we're looking at 10 years ago and then now. So if we're So yes, I understand everyone, absolutely everyone needs a place to live, and I don't want to deny that. But I do want to say that I focus on the lower income because that's literally who's getting pushed out. Like
Understood.
that's literally who's leaving Harlem by force.
Okay.
Um,
So,
yeah, and so I think, oh, and then in terms of the focus, it's census tract. It's just by the census tract of that area.
No, but
okay.
what's the
The
geographic
periphery,
area
right.
that's my question is, sorry.
So I believe it's, I mean, I would have to go look it up and maybe I could follow up with you, but I believe it's
Right.
like that tip of the district is basically showing that northern part of the district.
Yeah, census tracts are smaller than a council district or city districts. It's very specific. It's not hard to find though.
Okay. Okay, so this is Harlem Network News, and this has certainly been a robust and informative conversation. If we could get some closing statements from each of you, and I would like the closing statements to be skewed to what's next with this project from where you sit. Like, because from my layman's side, when I know that they withdrew the proposal. I didn't know if that meant they're going away forever, but obviously they own the property. So, what are the thoughts? What are the things that can happen? And at what point should the community be weighing in, or how can we, on what's going to happen? Because, it is private developers, but private developers, in my mind, if they're getting subsidies, or they could say they don't want it, that's wherein we should definitely have a say. And I don't know who can do that or what branches of government, but I mean, we have a lot of things, down to, and I do want to just offer off the track the condolences for all of those that are being just cut down by, whatever kind of rifles, Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Tulsa. I mean, our prayers are with them. And from the position of Harlem Network News, saying, well, let's put the age to 21 where somebody can get an assault rifle, I don't think that's it. Take the assault rifles out. 21, 40, 50, if that's what's doing it, take it out. So it's a similar thing with this housing. If this is what's doing it or causing the problem, which is now causing mental illness, homelessness, violence, disparity, lack of education, what do we do? What do we do? So I'm going to start with Delsina briefly. How do you see, where do we go from here? And then we'll go to Councilmember Christian, and we'll go to you, Keisha.
That was a lot again.
It's all a lot.
Compound questions. I feel like I'm doing a master's thesis up in. I guess I'll start with the first thing. I did want to point to a comment that that Keisha, Deputy Borough President Sutton made, and I heard someone on the call say something about we have to make sure we have housing for our young professionals. And I thought then, as I think now, I live in Lenox Terrace. So does the council member, and so did Keisha until she moved out and got married. And so one of the things that I really like about Lenox Terrace is that it has always been a place where people of all incomes could live. You could live down, and you could have. I remember there was a waiter, a server down the hall. Then there was a business owner downstairs. There was a judge. There's a principal across the hall. I mean, you had people, because Black people always lived in the same neighborhood. And because you can have a pretty high income and live in rent stabilized housing, which is really why we needed to save it, and I wish we could bring some units back in, is because these are the kinds of places, rent regulated housing, where young Black professionals live. So and young Black professionals can live in, and we can think creatively about this, right? We can do a building, and especially because we just talked about subsidies. Why not think creatively? Why not figure out how we can do a building that has enough of a percentage of deeply affordable, and then the income bands can go up. I mean, Kristin's point is 50% affordable, deeply affordable. But who says that you can't do 50% deeply affordable at 30% of AMI and do another band and then do another band? Why can't not we have a building with government loans or tax breaks? Why can't we do a building where the minority of the apartments are market rate? Why don't we do that? Because the people who are going to occupy the apartments that are market rate do not want to live in a building where 75% of the building is affordable. And I think that's just the way that I feel. And the developer is not going to make the killing that they are going to make with the market rate housing. So I think if you are really concerned and you're a developer and you really are concerned and you want to do building that benefits communities, you can find a way to do it. You may not be able to buy a bigger yacht, but it can be done if your goal is building to accommodate the people in this city.
Okay, well, thank you, Delsina. Well said, even in terms of speaking about the mix at like a Lenox Terrace. And it's also healthy, to have a good mix of people. And like you said, it probably was racially based because this is where the people could live. But, if you have children and they see a judge living across the hall, or a business person or a waiter, you know what I'm saying? It's a healthy mix, and, everybody's saying hello and shopping and doing what they have to do.
And it's always been a family, and neighbors are like the family.
That's what we have to go for.
If somebody was this profession or not. It was community.
Okay.
That's community.
So closing statements, Deputy Borough President Sutton.
Closing statement. So I'll just say that I think I'll start where I started off, which is that I just hope, and our office will continue to work to do everything that we can in our power, which is different power, but everything that we can to encourage. And we're thinking about some different approaches to, figuring out how we can encourage more developers to build affordable housing. Because again, we need those units. We desperately need those units. And I thank you for what you said, Delsina, in terms of framing the preference for 50 market rate units versus 600 market rate units. Very helpful. I totally appreciate that. And I guess my question is, well, how and this is something that the council member spoke to, is, how do we get the ball over the line in terms of getting more affordable units? Because effectively, yes, the project failed, but we also failed to get more affordable units on this particular project. So, and not to say that it's over, it may not be over, I don't know. But in this go round, we failed to solve the problem of adding more units, adding more affordable units to our neighborhood. And so that's where I leave is we need to work together to figure out how, and again, the council member offered up a solution for that. And I can, dig a little more deeply to kind of understand and, see whether or not that's a model that can be extrapolated island-wide, if you will. But, our job is to figure out how to answer the crisis. And also as a Harlem, 5th generation Harlemite girl, a Black woman who cares very deeply about my people and our displacement, and who recognizes that the only reason that I am able to still build, literally the only reason I'm still able to be here is because I was able to get a rent stabilized apartment 17 years ago. And that's why I'm able to live. And to your point, Delsina, if I wanted to move, which I have wanted to, sorry, my dog's barking. I have wanted to move to different parts of the neighborhood as well, and haven't been able to. I can't, because I can't find a unit that is large enough for my family that my family can afford. So I am literally a person who you're talking about, not in terms of what you were talking about, Kristin, in terms of $20,000 or $30,000, but in terms of being a person who, doesn't have mobility even within the community that my family has called home for 5 generations. So
very serious.
And what's that?
I said that's a very serious and real factor.
Right. And I say that so I just say that what I was saying is about me being a Black woman who also cares very deeply about my people, and our ability to maintain one of the points that we didn't touch upon at all, which is one of the points that the community board raised, which is around the political power that we have historically possessed here in Harlem, and maintaining that political power as a Black community. That we hadn't touched upon that at all, but the displacement that the council member talked about, it diminishes our ability to maintain her council seat as a Black seat, the Senate seat as a Black seat. We already, the Congress seat has already, because of the changes to the district, has already changed is now represented by a Latino man. So, this is a real thing. And so I understand and completely, I absolutely prioritize the importance of maintaining or encouraging as best we can our people to be able to maintain our presence in this unit for political reasons, because this is where we grew up and we love it. And I grew up loving it because of the light, because of all the things that we talked about before, because of the proximity to, the things that I needed to get to in other parts of the city. But we got to figure out how to build more units for our people in Central Harlem. And so that's where I leave it, is like, let's figure that out. It's a combination of it's the 2 barbells, not building more market rate and building more affordable. We got to get both of those priorities, not just one. That's where I'll leave us.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And that's a lot of food for thought in terms of just the reality and bringing in the political factoid. Very, very, very critical in terms of what we're facing, what we're dealing with.
I just wanted to mention that at a hearing that we had for the Lennox Terrace rezoning, the borough presidency here, the then borough president's hearing, Gail Brewer. When I did my presentation, when I did my speech, I made that very point, that what happens if you keep building MIH in communities of color, you are losing, it's a drip, drip, drip of losing Black and brown people from that community. And when you lose your percentage majority, you lose your political power. As Black people still in the United States of America, we have to be pay a lot of attention to that, because where you see Black representation in all bodies, Congress, the state legislature, the city council, you also see a percentage majority of Black people. If we're scattered to the winds, we will lose our power in this country, and we are not ready for that to happen. So yeah, I brought that up 4 years ago during the Lennox Terrace.
Thank you. As I said, this is a robust discussion, and it appears everybody's speaking truth to power here today, which is what we do on Harlem Network News. So, Council Member Kristin, if you would give your closing statements and just wrap it up in terms of what are the possibilities that may happen next with this particular, as we said, we're not talking about other things for the moment. We're talking about the 145, what can happen, what are the perimeters, where will they come back into the city council, and the fact that there was subsidies or are subsidies in there, that's like a light bulb type of thing because that involves us all. And also, has the mayor weighed in on this? Has Mayor Adams weighed in on this, or is this just sitting back? And you mentioned a lot about East New York and Charles Barron's district. How are they able to do it and we're not? What's the magic to that? So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, wow, that's a lot there, but okay. The, I'll start by saying that I think the state of it, it's hard to predict, what the developers will do. But I'm inclined to believe there will at least be some further conversation. The truth of the matter is they can only do just under 50 units as of right. And it's simply so lucrative for them to upzone that I would be shocked if we're not looking at least another conversation before they throw in the towel, because it's just so lucrative for them. But in terms of what will happen next, it remains to be seen. What I think we need to make sure we have are some standards, and that ties into East New York and how they have been able to do it. Because I not only spoke to my colleague in the council about, okay, how did you all do it? But I actually went and looked at the land use that went through East New York over the past 10 years. And they've had some really good projects. And this is what I mean by not all development is bad, right? And if you take it in our district too, right? We recently had Castle 3, which I spoke in favor of. The press will hide that from you, but I spoke in favor of this development, because it had supportive housing units. It had about 58 supportive housing units, and then it had 24 affordable units ranging from 20 to 60% AMI. It was really good development. So I think we need to think about, and it goes to Delsina's point. I think she hit the nail on the head in terms of being creative, but I think we need to set some standards and then also get creative. The fact is, an upzoning like this, they wouldn't have even seen it in East New York because they would have stopped it at the city planning level, like from jump. They would have said, you're never getting that past the Barrens. So I think part of why I've been taking a strong stance is because I am seeking to replicate a standard where certain things just don't happen. Let's stop it before it starts on some of these things that are really just destructive. There's no way that first plan, or even frankly the second plan, should have been there because they were just so unacceptable. And then 421A is going to get replaced. Let's see what happens. We are in a moment politically. We're in a moment politically where we might see, some really different things happening, because it's not just the subsidy, it's tax break, right? Like 421A, and what kind of tax breaks can we as a government offer? And it's the upzoning itself. That's government assistance to change the zoning map. So I think using the tools that we do have to leverage, using the tools we have as leverage is how we plow forward. We're also looking at, just in our housing task force, some really creative things like a CLT. A CLT stands for Community Land Trust. The idea behind that is that it's a partnership between government, the community, and developers, and sort of each group of that gets a stake. And a community land trust could be a way to move forward. The issue is, of course, and I think Keisha brought this up, and it's really very true, is of course the acquiring land is the issue. So this is the conversation we've been having in that housing task force, because the real estate is so expensive. So part of it is us grappling with what are we going to do with this super expensive, with the acquisition of land being so expensive, but us still needing to make things affordable. But that being said, I have faith in our ability as a community. You know, I'm third generation Harlem, and you know, we Harlemites, we stay in it. We stay in it, you know, we're still here. So I have faith in our ability to come together to figure it out, and to make some of the changes that are needed, use this political moment, and let's see if we can get some greater tools on the table to help us in this fight.
Okay, well, thank you all. And as I keep repeating, it's been quite a robust conversation with a lot of information to unpack. I look to the next meetings that the community board will have regarding this, you know, not just that there's an emergency and now we're going to meet tomorrow. I think, you know, as you're doing in your task force with the housing, you know, we need to be meeting on it when it's not the emergency. You know, we need to not drop the ball now that it's pulled out, because it's not going away. And I think another huge factor in what's happening in Harlem is that we are a part of the island of Manhattan, which is a money center of the world. We're not in East New York. So a lot of what's coming for Harlem, you know, has to do with, you know, folks coming up from the West Side, because brownstones, you know, are a little bit cheaper here, or a lot cheaper here, you know, and then it just pushes up the whole value of everything. So there are a lot of factoids because of what Harlem represents and the accessibility that you mentioned, be it highways, subways, you know, they're in prime time land.
No, that's
So
valid.
that's a huge and valid factor. So thank you very much. It's an honor to have had you all. And this is the kind of programming that Harlem Network News looks to continue to do. And we want everybody to know this is your city council person, Kristin Richardson. She's 4 months in. This is your deputy borough president, Keisha Sutton-James. And there is a Harlem office right over there near Amsterdam on 125th. You can walk in, it's a storefront. Our council member's office is right across from the Harlem Y. You can walk in there too. And we had the honor of having Delsina Glover, who's worked with the Public Advocate's Office, you know, housing champion, and now she is running for state assembly. So you've got some powerhouses on here. And we're sorry that Derek Perkison of NAN did, you know, he couldn't get in, but he was willing. He's been on several times, and very, very complex and interesting situation. But as you said, we're still here and still we rise. So thank you. This is Harlem Network News. Please reach out if you have stories, you know, funding support, ideas for how we can keep getting this information to the people. Go to Harlem Network News at gmail.com or harlemnetworknews.com. And you can reach us by phone at 646-261-5397. This show will be rebroadcast on our YouTube channel at 7:30 tonight. And we look forward to next week. Just looking forward to all of the great Juneteenth programs coming up, as well as having a special program with Malak Shabazz, Dawn Jones, and others to really talk about celebrating and keeping alive the birthday of Dr. Betty Shabazz. Very important. Her birthday was last Saturday, so we want to make sure that she gets celebrated, as she was the force after the death of Minister Malcolm. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a blessed Harlem Sunday. Take care.
And thank you, Terry, for doing this.
Okay, thank you all.
You're doing God's work, sis.
Absolutely. Good to see
Look at all of the support we can get to keep doing God's work. So
good to see my powerful women friends.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.